Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Katie Hathaway. I am the Market Development Manager here at Qbtech, and I'm joined here with my esteemed guests, Duane Gordon, who is the President of ADDA, and Helen Turnbull, who is on our marketing team here at Qbtech, and Evelyn Polk-Green, who is an educator and former President of ADDA and former President of CHAD. And I'm really excited to be joined with these great guests today to talk about lived experience with ADHD and what your patients might not tell you. So I want to just open up with a question to all of you. How long have you believed you have ADHD, and when were you diagnosed? Evelyn, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. I have believed I had ADHD since my son was diagnosed, which was about 30 years ago. And so when he was diagnosed and I started going through the checklist and learning about him, I was like, oh, okay. I did not get an official diagnosis though until I was in probably 10, 12 years later, maybe even longer than that. I was in my 40s, my early 40s, when I got an official diagnosis. Mm-hmm. When stuff started falling apart at work and I was like, oh, maybe I need to do something about this. So,
yeah. Do you feel that motherhood impacted how you were able to manage?
Yes. Yes. I don't even know yes, it definitely did. And I often felt like a failure as a mother. I could not understand why I could not do all the things that, and I've always worked. And when they, went right back to work after they were born. And so I could never figure out why I couldn't do it all the way other people did it all successfully. Like why my house always looked like a tornado had hit it, and why, kids didn't have lunch like they should, and all those kind of things. Until I finally just came to terms with realizing what it is, and it was part of living with it. And we learned to laugh with ADHD in our house. Otherwise, there would have been a lot more tears.
Yes. Yeah.
I didn't know anything about ADHD, much like Evelyn, until my daughter was diagnosed. So I was mid-30s at the time, and she was diagnosed, and we didn't know anything about this, so we're reading the books and what is all this stuff, and both my wife and I were like, don't know about our daughter, but this is you, man. So because of all the stuff going on with my daughter, we found out that there was medication. And I thought, yes, I'd just take the pills and be done with it. Because shortly before that, I had been diagnosed with diabetes, and you just, change the way you live and take some pills and you're good. It's not really going to affect you. So I thought ADHD would be the same. It's not.
Not so much.
Not so much. No.
Well, I was diagnosed a year ago, just over a year ago. And so early 30s, I'm 32 now. And it was actually only since joining Qbtech and learning more about ADHD in general and kind of what it is and how it shows up in adults and women especially, that I was going through at the time years of other diagnosis pathways and just not thinking that this suited like what my experience was and what I was going through. And it was only till kind of joining Qbtech and learning more about it, like I say, that I was able to then kind of steer the direction and go down the right path. But yeah, I spent my teens and 20s believing that I was just weird, I guess, and just completely incorrect and confused why I wasn't seeing the same things in the same way as other people. And that getting that diagnosis was a real eye opener and savior in that.
Yeah. Thank you all for sharing. I think there's so much. We've walked through the diagnosis journey with my son, who's very young. And I'm grateful every day for the education and experience I have through Qbtech and through my clinical work, because when you don't know what to look for, you don't know what to look for. And there's so many things that pop up that as individuals and as parents that we see in ourselves and in our kids that are just seem like maybe quirks, or that's just, how things go. And really, if you don't dig in deeper, it can be so easy to kind of miss those things that could manifest later that could be much more challenging. So for you all, when you started this journey, what were some of the struggles or things that you felt like, oh, why does that always feel so hard for me? Or what were some of the things that just felt like maybe this is just not how I'm wired, that are actually symptoms of ADHD that you learned about as you started on this journey?
Well, so there's some things that I thought were ADHD symptoms that I obviously had, that, time management, disorganization, being unable to follow through, all of those things. That was sort of what everyone expected, and I had those in spades, and right on, okay, and I can learn how to do this. But I remember it was at least 2 years after I started attending a support group, and that was 2 years after I was diagnosed. So 4 years now I've been struggling along, and somebody mentioned that emotional dysregulation is a symptom of ADHD. And that was the first time I'd heard of it. And I have been fired more times and ruined careers and ruined relationships because of an inability, usually in my case, to control my temper. And it's surprising to me that that's like not one of the first things that your doctor talks to you about.
And most don't say a word, don't know. Most don't even, most don't have a clue. Most don't have a clue.
But I suspect it's because, I'll tell you that flying here yesterday, I forgot my wallet, and then my wife had to come, and I had to go back out through security and get it. No problem. And I'll tell my doctor that. That I lost my job, I'm not going to tell my doctor that. That's embarrassing.
Right.
Right? That I had a fight with my dad and then didn't speak to him for 15 years. My doctor doesn't know that. Right? So the doctor doesn't know that you're going through this necessarily, and they're not going to ask because
nobody ever talks about that part of it. I know with my son and I, oh boy, the blow-ups we had. Oh my gosh, especially as the older he got and got closer to, and part of it is what I recognized later is that the things that I dislike about myself because of my ADHD are reflected in him, because he and I are far too much alike. And that's when I would really get upset with him. And the emotional blow-ups we had were kind of, I probably said some things to him that no mother should say to their child. And what's interesting when I think back at it now, like being able to blow up at him was almost like my safe space, because I couldn't do it at work. I was saying, earlier, as a Black woman, I can never be seen as the angry Black woman in, working in America. And so I had to hold it in out. So I never got fired. I was always, never those kind of things, because I had to hold it in. But when I got home, oh boy. One of the first lessons that I think we taught each other was how to apologize to each other after having, having one of these blow-ups, and because that was a key feature of life growing up.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting how it manifests as well, because I mean, you talked about like being in the work environment. If you're so afraid of that emotional dysregulation, that can turn into really unhealthy habits like perfectionism, to the point where if you're breaking yourself and burning yourself out because you're so afraid of what failure or what rejection might look like, that tends to spark a lot of that emotional dysregulation as well.
It does. And it actually, I think mine manifested itself in a lot of physical things too, a lot of health issues, because I held it all in during, and couldn't, but I was feeling it, and only, so a lot of health issues. And I think now looking back at it, it was that emotional dysregulation and not being able to, holding it in so much and not being able to like really express it, except for.
Well, I had no idea that this was related. I certainly had no idea it was ADHD at the time, but I had an ulcer before I was 25. Right? Just like, why are you so stressed all the time? So life is hard, man.
Exactly.
I find the hardest thing for me on kind of the daily is the overstimulation and the burnout that you get. And if you, like for me, for example, I'll go into work and I'll give 120%. And if you ask an ADHDer that gives 120%, that's a hell of a lot that you're giving and very, very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And so by the time lunchtime hits or early afternoon, I'm completely burnt out. And it's almost like that emotional dysregulation heightens because you're so exhausted and you tend to lose grip of being able to just cope with smaller normal, ordinary things as well.
Yeah. Have y'all found any tools? Because this is something that we deal with quite a bit in our house, is the emotional dysregulation. And my son and I have a very similar relationship. You know, talking about being parents and like, oh, then I see the things in my kids that maybe look like me. That's the conversation is happening frequently in my house with myself and my husband, just to be fully candid. So I'm curious, like what tools, because it is something, it starts as kids. I mean, my son particularly, he will hold it together all day, and his teachers look at me and they're like, he doesn't have ADHD. I'm like, oh, you spend 5 minutes in my house. And there's no question about that because he holds it together, and then we get home and it's a very different experience. So I'm curious, when it comes to the emotional regulation component and being able to build in tools for yourselves, have y'all found anything that's helped you throughout your day with that particular aspect? Because I do agree, I think it's so overlooked, and it's not something that is talked about regularly enough when it comes to living with ADHD.
I can jump in on this one. As an ADHDer, I absolutely hate routine, but it is vital for me to maintain consistency throughout the day. And that routine for me is very much founded on health and exercise and making sure I get sunlight in the morning where possible and making sure that I stay off screens. And it's almost like these, health constructs that are nice to have essentially for, an ordinary or neurotypical person is make or break for me to kind of make it through the day without either becoming completely dysregulated or shutting down.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah. Not only is the routine important, but how you build that routine. You were talking and I'm the same way. Morning is all my brain is available in the morning. Everything gets done in the morning. In the afternoon, not so much, right? And even my boss knew that before I retired. She would come to me and say, I got this and it's really important. Don't touch it today. I want your tomorrow morning brain on it, right? Or this is not important. Save it for this afternoon. I don't really care. Just, it's just got to be done. So you learn when you're on and when you're not, and you schedule things around that.
Definitely.
And then you make sure that your routine is built with the exercise and, walking outside and time away from people. My oldest daughter, who doesn't have ADHD, used to think I was so rude because we would go to like the family Christmas party or whatever, and I would bring a book so that midway through I could disappear into a room and read for a while and then come back out. And then we finally explained to her, I said, listen, it's just so that he doesn't tear somebody's head off. So that's probably better. And now she's a psychologist and understands. But at the time, that was a conversation like, why does Dad just not like the family? It's not the family. He doesn't like anyone.
Not just us. I know. When you look at our family, because the three of us, I have two sons, both have ADHD. I have ADHD. We are my oldest son and I are kind of alike, but the younger one is completely different. I attribute it partly to the fact I was actually pregnant with him when the older one was diagnosed. And so he kind of was born into this ADHD household where we put these things in place already.
Yeah.
But he was not diagnosed until he was 14. And I didn't believe he had it then. So I thought myself a terrible mother because, I had been president of CHAD. How come I didn't see this? But I realize now you talk about coping skills and it was for the emotional dysregulation and all kinds of things. When he was in preschool, he would literally, other kids were napping, he would run around the classroom. And luckily he had a teacher who understood that. So it let it out. And when he came home, he was always involved in sports, always had him in sports. And he was able to let all that out. He is my calm, laid back, cool ass. Duane will tell you, it's like everything rolls off his back, nothing. He's also the one that has established very good routines and knows what he needs and has things in place. unlike his brother and I, who are still all over the place. I'm terrible. I always laughed at Duane because he talks about like all the routines he has in place now, and I've seen them. I have got none of that. I've still managed to do none of that. And so my life is chaotic all of the time, for that reason. And my older son is the exact same way. Neither one of us have managed to. I have a terrible time with establishing habits and routines and those kind of things. And I know it would be better if I did, but I haven't. And at this point in my life at 63, I'm not going to really, I'm not all that worried about it at this point. It is what it is. So.
It is so hard to explain to someone, isn't it? Like with your example of having the book and having to go and take some time, it's so hard to explain to someone the impact that especially kind of burnout or that overstimulation actually feels like, because it's easy to be like, oh God, you're a bit tired, or you've spoken a lot today, like get over it, keep going. It is impossible, that cloud that you have in your head. And that's why I really disagree with the ADHD kind of attention deficit hyperactivity almost as a way of describing what this is, because there's so much more and it impacts you in so many different ways. Beyond attention or impulsivity as well.
So many different ways that doesn't even begin to.
It's a terrible name.
It is. It's a terrible name for it. I guess it beats minimal brain dysfunction.
Yes.
I suppose.
I saw something the other day that one of the providers that we work with has on his website that says it's something along the lines of your child's brain isn't missing things, it's seeing everything. And that like hyper attention to being in a room full of people and you're hearing all of the conversations and you're talking to one person, but you're hearing everything else. And the overwhelm that can create in your brain. I'm curious if y'all can share a little bit more about how living with ADHD impacts your day-to-day life, whether it comes to work or your relationships or your friendships, and how you've been able to build strategies in for yourself to be able to handle going to family gatherings or managing whether it's ADHD in the workplace or, all of you have very successful careers and groups that you lead. And Duane, you lead a really unique group to support people. So I'm curious if you can share a little bit more about how it affects your day-to-day and the strategies you've built in there.
I'm probably past the point where I think that it affects my day-to-day. I live this way because I'm ADHD. Right? That's just the way. Now, on occasion, there's a glitch in the system, and I go to the airport without my wallet. Normally, I never leave the house without my wallet because I know what coat I'm going to wear because it's wintertime and whatnot. So when I left the house, my coat was sitting in my wallet was sitting in my winter coat pocket, but I was going south where there was no snow. So the wallet stayed with the coat. That was the problem. That won't happen again because now that system doesn't work and I will adjust the system, right? So because my life is now, after many years, completely structured to handle my ADHD, those things don't happen nearly as often. But any disruption to the routine, people always laugh at this one. So I was going crazy trying to cook meals after we had our kitchen redone. We had to take everything out, redid the kitchen, all new cupboards, all in different places, whatnot, put stuff away. I can't find anything. And I'm, when I'm cooking, it's like clear the kitchen. I have to be alone. Nobody else can be wandering around it, right? Got to be alone. And I have to, the things that I need have to be where they're supposed to go. Well, now there was no where they're supposed to go, and everybody was just kind of putting them back wherever they felt like it. Oh, this could be a good place now that the kitchen is. Anyway, family meeting. Your father is going nuts. I am going to blow a gasket. How can we solve this? And so we had a family meeting and we reorganized the kitchen, and then we put Post-its on every cupboard door of where everything goes. And as long as everybody kept putting the stuff where it's supposed to go, then I could bring my pressure back down again, because it just, when I go to reach for something and it's not there, and I know it's husbands can't find anything, but if it's not where it goes, it might as well not exist, right? It's like, I'm never going to find it. And how many times have we look for stuff that could be right there, and somebody will come in behind and here it is, but we can't see it because it's not where it goes.
Not where we expect it to be.
So glitches like that come along, and I've spent years building up these routines. I remember the first time we went on, this was our 25th anniversary, we were going for a month in Italy. And I had gotten my life sort of together by then, but we were going away for a month, and we were going to live in a new place, somewhere I didn't speak the language. And so my routines. What am I without my routines? Am I going to fall apart and not be able to do? Anyway, it was actually very liberating, because I realized that put me anywhere and I can establish routines again very quickly. And if you go to my hotel, I got there late last night. All of my stuff is in the drawers. All of my pill bottles are lined out the way that they're supposed to be. Everything is where it's supposed to go, so that when I walk back in the hotel room, it's where it's supposed to be, and I can deal with that. So it doesn't matter that the place changes, but I know how important the structure and the systems and the routines are to that. And so it's when somebody throws a monkey wrench in one of my systems, that's when things all fall apart.
I love that example, because I think it's a common misconception about ADHD that all ADHDers are really disorganized and don't know where their stuff is and everything's a mess. But honestly, if someone looked in your hotel room, they'd probably think, oh, he's like super meticulous and very organized. But you've figured out that that's how you have to set yourself up for success. I think that's a really good point. I mean, my son's the same way. Like, his stuff is
perfect. Yeah. What I have figured out in all these years of dealing with it with both my children and myself is that there are people like me who live in utter chaos all the time and who have no routines. I mean, I have some things, like I was listening to you, I thought about, oh, well, yeah, when I do come into a hotel, I always do that. And I know, so I do, when I think about it, there are some things. And I know as the kids were younger and we were growing up, we had, like, you talked about what tools you used. I had a trick where no clock in our house was on the same time. And nobody knew, was it 5 minutes ahead, 5 minutes behind, whatever. And so we always operated on, if you don't leave at the time of the latest clock, you're going to be late. And so that helped us be on time for everything. There you go. I don't do it so much now because it's just me, and I don't, but for them and having to, those are the kind of things we put in place then. But what I know now is, like, my son, a really good friend of mine whose son has ADHD, they have such routines and have put things in place almost to the point of having OCD of the way it is. It's everything has to be. And so my youngest is like that, whereas my oldest and I, and this child I'm talking about, whose sister is like us, we're all over the place. We still have new routines. We're still whatever. We live in utter chaos, but it's okay. It's like I said earlier, I was saying I didn't know where my purse was one day last week, and I was supposed to be somewhere. And so I called one of my colleagues and said, I'm going to be late. I don't know where my purse is. I have to find my purse. And so she was losing her mind on the other end. She was like, what do you mean you can't find your purse? What do I need to come help you find? And I was like, I don't know. It's somewhere. I'll get it. I'll be there when I get there. What? Calm down. It's all right. It's, it's not the first or the last time. My purse, my keys, whatever. And so, and that's, I guess, that's part of my coping, is knowing that is likely going to happen. And if it happens, okay. And I'm going to laugh about it once I'm not upset anymore. I'm going to laugh about it. But I do think that there are definitely degrees of how people cope with it. And there are those people who need to have those routines and those things. And then there are people like me who, I'm sure my life would be easier if I had them, but oh well.
Yeah. I find it so funny that people say to me, you are the most organized person I have ever met. I've had people that like, your organization skills are just incredible. And in my head, I'm like, you have no idea the stress of getting to this like rigid system together and kind of having to maintain that level of stress to keep it together.
Yes.
And then if it breaks, then everything is spilling out everywhere. So I think it's that extremes of both that I often find myself in, is that, okay, I'm locked into this extremely rigid routine where, okay, I'm functioning, but I'm very stressed all the time.
Yeah.
Or I let it go and I'm a bit less stressed, but it's total chaos.
Yes.
And that's, it's a tough one to balance.
Yes. And I think I know that when I have tried to establish like really rigid kind of routines or those kind of things, it has put me under so much stress, and I'm just like, nah, it's not worth it. I can't. No.
My day to day, to go back to your question, I find myself in a perpetual cycle of the same challenge every single day. And that is my ability to process information is a little bit different. Therefore, other people think I'm stupid sometimes, or that fear comes in, and then that rejection sensitivity dysphoria comes in, and then boom, we're back to the and I've find myself kind of learning about this a little bit more and more, and understanding that part of ADHD is how you process information. And for me, in maybe a work environment or even home environment, if someone was to ask me a question, or like I can't, there's a barrier that comes between that auditory request and question and me translating that and being able to action that. And my memory is appalling. And so I find it really difficult when people just ad hoc kind of ask questions, and I'm like panicking because I can't process the information. And then I just end up thinking, God, everybody here thinks I'm so stupid. And then that in itself is a cycle. So one thing that has, as I've kind of become more aware of that, forgiveness has played a huge part in my ability to manage my own kind of day to day, and just completely forgiving yourself and being okay saying, actually, I don't process information like that. I'm going to need that in writing, or give me a couple of hours and I'll get back to you so I can go ahead and scour through my folders and try and remember what I've done. And so forgiveness, I think, is really important, especially when you're going through that diagnosis process. And afterwards, just like, okay, this is who I am. This is how I process information. This is what I need, and becoming okay to ask for what you need as well.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I agree that forgiveness, humor are the things that I think have, I say all the time, they're the reason that we didn't kill each other in our household. The three of us is being able to forgive ourselves and being able to forgive each other, keeping being humorous, seeing the humor in everything, because, like I said, if you're not laughing, you're going to be crying all the time, the way things happen. So being able to see the humor in things. And then I think also being honest with each other and, with ourselves about what ADHD means for us and in our lives, and how that translates into our day to day. And I think without those three things, I don't know that we would have made it at all.
I tease people all the time about one of the hardest things about ADHD is that we always lie to ourselves. I'll remember that, right? I'm going to put that somewhere safe where you'll never see it again. You really got to stop telling yourself those lies. I will absolutely not remember that. That's like promise. I have a desk that is a door on two sawhorses because there are no drawers. If I put something in a drawer, I might as well have thrown it out. Doesn't make any difference. And the wall is a huge bulletin board because that's where everything goes that I want to remember, because I can just look up there and I can see it, right? And if I put something away, then I'm really just lying to myself, thinking that I will remember it. And that's not, it's just not going to happen. You were talking about how organized you were and so on. One of the things that I learned early on, because we used to move a lot when I was a kid. I didn't know it was ADHD at the time, but I very quickly learned I shouldn't own anything. And my parents thought I was a really weird kid because every other kid's room was messy. I had like a book, a bed, maybe a toy or two, and I didn't want any clutter, and I didn't leave anything out because it was all going to be packed in a box and moved somewhere and opened up in another room, and I was going to be completely lost again. And now I just continue to live that way. My wife, who also has ADHD, does not. She's more like Evelyn with stuff everywhere, and I kind of have to. It's okay. I can look at just my stuff. And I don't see her mess because that drives me nuts. I can remember we were talking even about getting married. And I said, we're going to have a problem because you've got like little decorations and knickknacks and stuff everywhere. And I just am not going to be able to deal with that. So anyway, so we have these hutches filled with knickknacks and pictures and all this stuff, but at least they're not scattered all over the place.
Yeah.
So I just don't
compromise.
Compromise is good.
Anyway, weird symptoms.
Yeah. I think that understanding how you're uniquely wired that's what I hear from folks all the time of like, oh my gosh, now I understand my brain a little bit better. I mean, in walking through this process with my son, there were so many things where worked in the pediatric population for my whole career before I came to Qbtech. And so I was hyper aware of some of the things that he was experiencing, that we were experiencing at home. And so when we went through the diagnostic process for him, we learned about his processing speed and how different it is from his visual spatial and all of these things that were really strong. And my goodness, when I'd be like, oh, he can, do all of these amazing things, but he cannot remember when I say, go put your shoes in the drawer, he cannot do it. And I know developmentally he should be able to do it. And I just last week was he plays soccer, and he was in an indoor soccer place where there's 6 classes going on at the same time. There's 2 coaches with each. There's 10 kids in each class. There's multiple fields. It is so loud. There's music playing. Kids are yelling. And then the coaches are like, everybody freeze. My poor son was the only one who didn't freeze. And the only thing I could think is he's probably hearing every other kid make noise. He's hearing every other coach. He's hearing the music that's in the background. He's hearing the balls going in the nets, and he didn't freeze. And the coach made him sit out. And he came over and I said, buddy, what happened? And he's like, I don't know, mommy. And it broke my heart for him because he's almost 6. He's dealing with processing speed that's much different than the people around him, and also dealing with a brain who's taking in probably triple the amount of information that his little friends were. And it was so eye-opening to me in that moment of, ooh, maybe this is an area that I should help him understand. Your brain works a little bit differently. So you might need to stay closer to the coach than your friends in this type of environment. I think having that like you said, I need different ways to look at this. I need to process this information differently. I need time. I need it written rather than verbal. I'm with you on the verbal. Like, please don't tell me anything. Just give it to me on a piece of paper or in an email, and I will execute.
Yes.
But if you tell me,
send me an email.
It's gone. Yes. Like I'm really, I feel you on that. So, what other things have you learned about yourself in this process and in this journey, and as you've lived,
I'm just going to say, I feel everything you just said about your son.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say one of the most important things I think I did for both of them and for myself was to do just that, was to talk to them about it. I've had parents, over the years say, well, I don't want my kid to know that he has ADHD. I don't want to say it because we don't want them to think, look at it as something is wrong with them. And I'm like, if they don't know, how can they cope with it? How can they come up with coping skills? How can they understand why they're different than their friends and that it's okay? Their brain just works differently.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I agree 100%. Yes, that was the smartest thing I think I did for them and for myself, to just say, be self-aware about where my issues were going to be. And this is a problem for me. And to not just with me, but like to my coworkers. One of the reasons I was able to be successful at work is because I was never one to, I didn't officially disclose to HR or anything, but the people around me knew, and they would know. Don't tell Evelyn. Send her an email. Yeah. Don't put that on her desk because you'll never see it again. And they know those things, and I'm okay with them knowing it and with them reminding me. And then they also help, build me up to say, but you do this so much better than we do. So we're going to rely on you, and we're happy to help you with what the places where you have issues. And the same thing with the kids, for them to know that, that is not a strength for you. So that's not, let's not volunteer to do that, because that's not going to be a thing that you're going to do well. But it's okay because you do other things well.
Yes.
Normalizing it. Yes. Normalizing it. Absolutely. And also just being very self-aware about it. And not being ashamed of it either. And not being afraid to tell, yourself and other folks what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good.
I think that's really important. That's definitely how I kind of manage things now, is that self-awareness. And I think we've touched upon it a little bit, but overwhelm is probably one of, personally, my biggest challenges. And I just find everything overwhelming. And if it comes at me too quickly, I'm just like, it's going to take a while for me to, stop panicking and deal with it. And I think that self-awareness and especially with things like overwhelm, where it's like, okay, I need to sit out for a little bit, or I need to go for a walk, or I need to not talk to people for a little while and just kind of bring myself back down and go and sit in a dark room and have some quiet. It has been a real game changer, because it means you can go, then come back in, and then come out, and then come back in as and when you need. And going back to that forgiveness as well, I get overwhelmed super easily. That doesn't mean I can't do things. It doesn't mean I'm rubbish. It just means that I can work really fast here, and then I need to take a break and keep going on that cycle. So
that's good.
Yeah.
I talk all the time about acceptance, and getting over that hurdle that, you have ADHD, and it's okay that you have ADHD. It doesn't mean you're broken. It means, that you just work differently. And actually, at my last job, my boss played a big role in helping me with that, because in the corporate world, you learn how to do things their way. You have to fit in. And I didn't, and struggled. I mean, I would go in, I would do something, it was new, it was exciting, I would excel at it. So they would promote me, and I would crash and burn. So finally at this job, I said, okay, I don't want to be promoted. I already know that. Don't know why, but I know it's going to crash and burn. So do not promote me. You can give me more to do. It could be, whatever, but don't promote me. Okay. And then she started working with me, and she noticed, for example, she would ask me a question. I'd say, I don't know. And then I would answer. And she said, okay, so stop saying you don't know. You know. Just take the time that it takes to process the answer. It's okay. I'll wait. Right? It's like you're not on the clock here. And that was a big, I do know. Oh my, that was a surprise to me that I do know. Because I always had the answer afterwards, but it just, the processing the question, figuring out, and then organizing that into an answer took more time. And just so that people didn't think I was stupid, I'd say, I don't know. Right? I don't know how that was supposed to improve things, but whatever. So accepting that I'm a certain way, and then figuring out, taking the time to figure out that, okay, well, what that means is I'm going to struggle here, but it also means that I'm going to excel here.
Yeah.
Right? And Evelyn knows this. My speeches I usually write on the way up to the podium, sort of thing. And I used to teach, and I did the same thing. It drives Linda nuts, because she had all her lessons planned, prepared months ahead, and I was like...
That's why we get along so well. We do the same thing. Yeah. People ask me for things. I do a lot of presentations for educators around, well, a lot of things, but especially ADHD. And so, they always ask for your slides. We need your slides from long ahead of time. I'm like, really? Because I'm not going to finish them till the night before. Right. So here's one version, but this is not what I'm going to talk about when I get up here. Yeah. I'm going to have a totally different one is going to come up on screen, because, I'm not going to be done till then.
So this accepting that you are the way you are, and then proactively dealing with that is huge. Actually, that's why ADDA was such a big part of everything for me.
Yeah.
It was the place where I could go to be accepted, because it's very hard to accept yourself if nobody else does.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the importance of, especially ADDA. So of course, Duane and I are going to be ADDA groupies and whatever, but because it's been such a big part of our lives, but any kind of support. I mean, when I started out, it was not ADDA because my kids were young and I didn't know I had ADHD. It was a chat, but it was just having that support and finding that support and being someplace where, I remember the first ADDA conference, and it's interesting because it's a little different than CHAD, because CHAD is composed mostly of parents of kids with ADHD who don't necessarily have ADHD themselves, or maybe don't recognize that they don't.
Yeah.
So they have a little different take on it. ADDA is all about, as an adult, it's about adults, and it's about knowing and accepting your ADHD. And so the best thing is, when we have conferences and you walk in the door, and it's okay if you lose your keys. And I would actually, when I was planning conferences for us, I would say, when we did our little hotel things, I tell the hotel people, okay, everybody's going to lose their keys at least 3 times. Be prepared and tell your staff not to, whatever. They're going to lose their keys. They're going to forget where their rooms are. I want you to be aware that this is because that's who we are. And it's okay. And I have heard so many people say when they get involved, either when they come to a conference or when they just get involved in one of our groups, how for the first time they can breathe because they realize they're not alone. They're not the weird kid in the room anymore. And there are other people like them, and accept them, and don't, if they interrupt while they're talking, it's okay. Nobody's going to blow their stack at them.
Yeah.
And it's such a feeling of relief to know that you are not alone, that you are that there's a population, that there's a family, a tribe, as we call ourselves, of other people who get it.
You were talking earlier about trying to explain to people about that overwhelm and so on.
Yeah.
And being around fellow ADHD, you don't have to explain.
Yeah. It's always the first thing I say to people when they ask me advice for find a group, whether it's virtual, whether it's whatever, find a group of people that can support you. Yeah. And as a parent, the same thing. That's, finding that group of other parents that had, even before I knew I was diagnosed or knew for sure that I had it, finding that group who could, just help me understand what was going on, who'd been there, done that, who understood what we were going through, makes all the difference in the world. Not having that isolation.
I mean, think about your son. I mean, there will be times when he's going to be the weird kid.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But when he finds a group of other weird kids to hang around with, it'll be cool.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
And in those other circumstances as well, we're obviously, in school, awareness is so important, and I'm so happy being part of conversations like these where we can just very candidly talk about the real struggles, because I know we've talked about the funny parts of ADHD or the comical parts, but there are some really difficult, challenging present, and how people, and especially young people and children as they're growing up, feel about themselves has such a huge impact on their adult life as well. Yeah. And I think the more we can continue having these conversations, the more it's accepted in schools and in the workplace, where structures are put in place where it's it's okay, you don't work like that, you work like this, so go and celebrate that, and let's find structures that fit that. Is going to be really life-changing to millions of people.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I think when you said that, I felt it viscerally because I was undiagnosed. I mean, I had done great up and through high school. I had a full scholarship to college, and I got to college and feel completely apart. I, spent weeks at a time inside of my dorm room, not coming out. Back then, we didn't know about mental health and we didn't talk about it. So, but I'm sure in today's world, somebody would have, come and intervened or whatever. And it was because I did not understand. I lost all that scaffolding, all those things that supported me with my ADHD that I didn't know I had when I got to college. And when I think back of how bad it could have been and how devastated I was, and it took me a long time to build myself back up and that to get the self-esteem back and to really understand what was going on with me and how it devastated me. And I think that was part of my impetus for figuring out, because, I was in early childhood education when I had my son, and so for years we knew something was wrong, but we weren't sure what. And I related to you in that journey of trying to figure out and going through the diagnostic process. But part of it was I was determined that if there was something that we could do to make his life better so he would not go through, because I remember feeling like the weird kid even growing up, even though I was, fairly successful, but I never felt like I belonged. And I always felt isolated and not part. And it just like came to a head when I went to college, but all through growing up. And so, yes, if we can stop that, I mean, that's my mission as an educator, and why I do those things is so that I can explain to other educators and to families. And this is,
And that's it. Like, imagine where we would be if more neurodiverse people had more confidence in themselves.
Yes.
Imagine what we could push forward much quicker.
Yeah.
Because the skills are there and we work very, very differently. And so I think personally, confidence has just has wrecked a lot of my early life. And if I didn't have that, if I'd known about ADHD sooner, then I think it would have been a really different story.
Yeah. I am so thankful that we've had this conversation today. And as we start to wrap up, I wanted to just, Duane, you and I have talked about this in the past, of clinicians being able to understand what truly living with ADHD feels like on a day-to-day basis. And I'm curious your perspective on how clinicians understanding that lived experience can help them build trust with patients. And we see a big shift towards virtual care in the field that we work in the work that we do with clinicians. I'm curious, virtually, and ADDA is all virtual. And, a lot of our clinicians and the patients are seeing each other virtually. How can understanding everything that we've talked about help that trust relationship to build and help patients get the support they need faster?
So the first thing is, going virtual is already showing understanding of people with ADHD, because getting everything together to get to an appointment somewhere is a challenge. So that's huge. Being able to do it virtually without leaving your house, that makes care so much more accessible.
Yes.
But if I could say one thing, if this gives clinicians more time to spend with the patient, ask more questions, because they're not telling you everything. The worst things they're not telling you. I don't tell my doctor that I blew up at my boss and got fired again, and these are all things that have happened to me that my doctor doesn't know. He treats me for my ADHD. I'll tell him that I forgot my wallet when I went to the airport, because that's funny. It's not life-threatening. It is not embarrassing. It is not devastating to me and my family and so on. And those are the things that I'm not just going to share, except that those are the real cost of living with ADHD. And so, when you make it hard to get the medication, or I remember one doctor said he was going to open an ADHD clinic, and he had a lot of patients to get through. And he said, well, I'm going to make it really efficient. So if you're late to an appointment, you're out. That's good. Yeah, right on. Very understanding. It takes a lot of work for us to understand our ADHD. We need that kind of investment from clinicians to understand the real depths of ADHD, the stuff that we're not going to tell you unless you ask.
Yeah. I'm going to say this from this perspective that I have been working with. I'm in a lot of groups with a lot of Black and brown women with ADHD, particularly women. And what I would say is believe what they say to you, because almost every one of them has been diagnosed with depression, with anxiety, with everything. And sure, ADHD all those things go along often, but usually all those things, ADHD is the underlying cause, but they're looking at all these other things, or they don't believe them, or they, for whatever reason. So I think if taking the time, asking questions, but believing the answers to those questions when you hear them, I know one of the things that I feel so incredibly fortunate is both of my doctors that have treated my ADHD have been Black women, who also happen to have ADHD. So I walk in the door and they could look at me and tell what was going on in my life. I never had the same thing. And so, my wish for everyone is to have someone that understanding working with them to make the difference, because the pain that I see with, and actually I'm saying Black and brown women because that's who but a lot of other women that I deal with, particularly saying, the same kind of thing. So we need to believe people when they tell you what's going on. Yeah. And I agree with Duane, ask those questions to get the information, because they don't often know what they're not telling you.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think having access to virtual care, there's so much more transparency when it comes to choosing your provider, who you're seeing, who your therapist is. You can try to, and there's quite a few of the online platforms that allow you to see their background and see a picture of them. And these are their specialties. There's so much more transparency when it comes to that.
I have real hope for that.
Yes.
Because of.
Yes. Yeah. Helen, do you have anything to add?
No, I agree completely, especially with the asking questions. I mean, I touched upon it earlier, but I went through a real misdiagnosis roller coaster. And I think if I had a clinician who were asking more questions and the right questions as well to really understand what was going on, because there is an embarrassment to it, and you kind of think, I'm really down, but why are you down? Well, because you're dealing with all of this other stuff internally as well. And I think asking those right questions is essential, and virtual care, as you say, Duane, gives you that time to do that as well.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm so thankful for all of you being here today. And Duane, you traveled quite far to be here today. And Evelyn, really also. So just really thankful. You've traveled maybe the farthest. You're in my head. I'm like,
London.
She's here, but she's coming from London. So truly, thank you all for being here and for your openness and just willingness to share your experience. And thank you for tuning in to this conversation. And we'll see you next time.